said a couple of times that we would discuss England's announcement today about their one-day and T20 squads, and so we will. The main headline news was Ben Stokes returning, as we always expected. I put on Twitter, as someone brought to my attention today, in July last year when he made his retirement, I said, well, this is good news for him. He'll miss the next year of one-day cricket, then he'll come out of retirement just before the World Cup and enjoy a nice break from the format. And so it's proved exactly. He missed 11 one-dayers in this space of time. I doubt he would have played any of them anyway, due to the rest and rotation and careful management of Stokes, the Test captain. And he put up a tweet before suggesting that this was always going to happen.
Yes, and I don't quite know what I think about it. Because everybody thinks that this is not only always going to happen, and I did think it was going to happen, but also seem to think it's a good idea, and that England will be stronger for him. I'm not quite sure that they will be, because looking at their side, Harry Brook is not in the ODI squad at the moment. And when Ben Stokes plays as a specialist batter,
which he's going to, by the way. So Luke Wright, the selector, has been pretty clear about that Stokes... And again, just to go back to this inevitability piece to it, I'll quote from Wright. It wasn't really a case of changing his mind. He was always interested in coming back. It wasn't a case of needing to beg him or anything like that. He was always keen.
Yeah,
I mean, it says it all, doesn't it?
It does, but when he played as an all-rounder, he was a no-brainer. You obviously select him. When he plays as a specialist batter, then suddenly there's a compromise that has to be made, because he's not going to open the batting, you wouldn't think. So Jason Roy's not in the best of form, but in an ideal world for England, they'd open with him and Bairstow. You'd have Root in there. You'd probably have Harry Brook as a hugely destructive batter. They'd be looking to try and get Liam Livingstone in.
Yep.
So where does he actually fit? I mean, I suppose in India, where it gets a little bit easier is that Joe Root will probably do a lot more bowling. So he could be a batting all-rounder in that top six. They'll want... someone like maybe Will Jacks hanging around the squad is a possibility for later on, because he's a spinning, batting all-rounder.
So Jacks would have to be there as a reserve, though, right? Because they've named their World Cup 15.
That's right.
So no Brook.
No Brook.
No Jacks. And no Archer. But Archer is going to go as a travelling... Reserve. Now, this is interesting to me. So, again, I'll go back to what Luke Wright said at his press conference this morning. Unfortunately, we're just running out of time with him. He's not going to come around quite quickly enough, especially for the first part of the World Cup. There's a duty of care with him, and so on it goes. But if they take him as a travelling reserve and he's theoretically fit for the second half of the tournament, you can't simply replace a player.
No.
The technical committee, which they have for each World Cup, only allows a replacement in the event of an injury. So what are they going to do? Take a 2x4 to David Willey? Well, they effectively did that before the 19 World Cup, but to make room for Archer. So the quicks that are in the squad: David Willey, Reece Topley, so two left armers. Topley gets his chance at a 50-over World Cup for the first time. He's fit again, having got injured at the IPL and in last year's 20-over World Cup before that started. Chris Wokes, who's a set and forget in the 50-over format, as another player, and Gus Atkinson, who's the bolter. You might say that Atkinson is the beneficiary of Archer's ongoing injury problems, because he's the guy who we touched on before. He's blowing up the speed radar at the moment. He's only played 2 list day games, and they were 2 years ago in what we now call the Metro Bank Cup. But I suppose it's been both in 4-day cricket, now 100 ball cricket, and in the blast for Surrey over the last 2 years that we've seen this extra pace that he's got, and thus he's been fast-tracked somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, he's hitting 90, 91, 92 miles an hour regularly. The only issue for Atkinson is stamina and fitness. And I guess the red ball outings he's had for Surrey have been good, but he doesn't play every game by any means. Surrey definitely rotate. They can afford to rotate their seamers. Not so much when we get to the back end of the season, but I suppose Atkinson will be in the ODI squad, so he's going to miss out on those red ball games.
Right.
Having to bowl 10 overs in India shouldn't be too much. There's time off between games, but I'm not sure he gets straight in that starting lineup, because they're going to want to find space for someone like Sam Curran, because he knows Indian conditions really well, and he gives them great options with the bat. They'll want Mark Wood to play, they'll want Chris Wokes to play, and I would think Topley might be just ahead, because everyone values the left arm seaming option. So I guess I was a little surprised that Jacks wasn't there because of what he's done with the ball. He's bowled quite a bit this summer, and he bowled famously on his debut, took 6 for on debut in Pakistan.
Quite.
So on those pitches, he bowls quite hard into the wicket. So I thought that might work for Indian conditions. Moeen Ali will be there, Adil Rashid, so there's some old guard. It'll be the last knockings.
Quite a bit of the 2019 crew and the double world champions that we spoke about with Wigmore and Roller last week.
Butler, Moeen Ali, Bairstow, Adil Rashid, Joe Root, Jason Roy, Ben Stokes, Chris Wokes, Mark Wood. I mean,
missed out on Wood there as well.
Yep.
In that discussion about fast bowlers, Wood, a world champion. We saw how quickly he was bowling in the Test series recently.
Yep.
You can always add a few kilometres an hour when bowling in a shorter spell in a white ball game. So they've got lots of good options. But yeah, I was just interested by the idea that Archer will go and implying that he might come back in. There is no viable way, short of an injury, that he could.
No,
Anyway.
he can't for obvious reasons. But I think also they want him close. They want him close by. They want to cuddle him, monitor him, and because there's still the option if he gets fit of the Test series in India, which would be a strange place for him to recommence. But there isn't anything really big for England to do after the World Cup. Other than there are some one-day games in the West Indies, which he, I guess, could go to. But you start a whole new World Cup cycle at that stage.
Well, you start thinking about the 20-over World Cup, don't you? Because the two white ball teams are run concurrently.
And that's June next year in West Indies and possibly America.
They're probably selling tickets to that World Cup already. They're only selling tickets to the one-day World Cup in India that starts on the 4th of October. Today's the 16th of August. On the 25th of August. So you're giving them 6 weeks or whatever it is, not even, to buy tickets for that, which is utterly absurd. But
it's a totally different thing, isn't it? I mean, we think it's crazy because we live in countries where the ticket prices are high and they actually affect the revenues. And what happens in the ground is really important. So World Cup in England, you want as many tickets sold as possible, at as high a price as possible, as many people buying burgers and beers and heaven knows what else. The economics for Indian cricket don't work like that. It's the money they'll get for hosting the tournament, it's the eyeballs, it's the broadcast deals, the cost of the tickets just isn't very high.
No,
that's
all true.
You're
right.
Kind of different.
None of that's wrong, but at the same time, it can be. It's incredibly disrespectful to.
I agree.
To fans who might not only come from India but from around the world. But anyway, so that's the England one-day squad. Before they play in India, they will play a 4-match series against New Zealand in September. They also play 4 T20 internationals that precede the one-dayers. So that squad's less about the short term and I guess more about the road to the Windies and America in next May and June.
A couple of interesting ones in there.
Yeah, that includes John Turner, the South African import, if you want to call him that we spoke about earlier, the 22-year-old with a bit of pace about him. It also includes Harry Brooks, so he missed out on the one-day squad, but he'll be in the T20 squad. The aforementioned Gus Atkinson will also, in all probability, debut for England in that format of the game. Luke Wood, who's played periodically over the last 12 to 18 months in the England white ball teams, and Josh Tongue gets his first white ball opportunity there as well. And we saw how quickly and how effectively he bowled against Australia and against Ireland earlier this summer.
Again, they've gone for some pace and some difference. And Ben Duckett, playing T20 cricket, but not 50-over cricket, which again, I think England have put a little bit of pressure on themselves in their World Cup squad there, because with Stokes and Roy, you've got Stokes, who will be an injury concern.
Yep.
And yet in the T20 squad, you've got someone like Duckett, who is perfectly happy playing 50-over cricket. I mean, he goes off like a train in Test cricket, so he'll be happy playing 50-over cricket. And in the likes of Will Jacks, Harry Brook, you've got, especially Harry Brook, you've got a guy long form. I mean, a 50-over game, he could hit serious numbers. 150 off 80 is not inconceivable. So, Stokes is probably keeping Harry Brook out of that one-day squad, wouldn't you say? Because he'd probably be the next specialist batter off.
You'd think so. Maybe it was Brooks' modest returns in India in the IPL that's counted against him here too. I know he made a century, but that was the outlier.
That's true, but that was at T20 though, wasn't it?
T20, yeah. You think a player of Brooks' prodigious ability you'd want in a 50-over side. He seems to suit the way they play so well too. He doesn't hit sixes, does he? He hits boundaries and hits sweepers very, very hard.
Yep.
And he bats and he plays unusually, which I think is always an asset in white ball cricket. Like he finds unusual parts of the ground. So, but he won't be there. He will be there in the T20 stuff. And Rayan Ahmed's the other one in the England T20 squad worth watching. They're clearly thinking about him across the 3 formats, and I wonder whether he'll be in that England Test squad when they're in India when they play in February and March.
I would think he probably will be. I think England's lack of spinning options, especially because they won't have Moeen Ali and Adil Rashid won't go. Jack Leach will come back, but they'll want to take at least 2 other spinners, one of whom will surely be Rayan Ahmed. The other might be Jacks again, because he's gone to Pakistan. They're totally different wickets, by the way.
Yes.
People lump India and Pakistan together. They're nothing like it, as you know, because you've done full series in both. And Pakistan's a slog on some flats, not heaps, which don't need to be like that, incidentally, because they're first-class games. It's not like that, but the test matches it is. And Indian pitches can be whatever the curator decide, which is one of the lovely marvels of Indian cricket, isn't it?
I missed a couple of bits in segment 1, which I meant to talk about after the Finney retirement. Another retirement was Wahab Riaz from international cricket at the age of 38. And I got that. I saw that tweet come through this morning. I thought, hang on a minute, Wahab Riaz is still playing international cricket.
When did he last play?
2020 was his last.
So he's retired. Oh, that's good.
He's
to
been
know.
effectively retired. It's a bit like Greg Matthews, who never formally retired. I think Wahab Riaz had a bit of that going on. 27 Test matches, 91 one-day internationals, which was his most productive format for Pakistan, where he took 120 wickets in that famous spell at Adelaide in the quarterfinal of the 2015 World Cup, and 36 T20 internationals. The tweet ended by saying, "Exciting times ahead in the world of franchise cricket." And then I took a look. He's already played, according to his Cricinfo profile, for 51 teams.
And he's 38.
So
how many opportunities is he expected to get?
So looking forward to his time in franchise cricket. But yes, he wants to add, I guess, maybe you want to try and hit 60. We used to joke about Dirk Nannis having the most amount of teams on his sheet, maybe a decade ago, with like 15 or 16, and that was seen as a novelty. Wahab Riaz, 51 teams on the Cricinfo
Ravi
profile.
Bopara's up near there, because I got Alison Mitchell to read out the teams that Ravi Bopara played for in the break between innings, because we're still on air, and we're thinking about things to do. So I said, well, try this, see how long it takes. We'll put the stopwatch on it, and it took her 54 seconds to read all of Ravi Bopara's franchise teams.
I'm not going to
Chris
subject you to
Gale
that.
might be just ahead of it.
I mean, to be fair, a lot of the Wahab Riaz teams are not franchises. They're just simply different configurations inside Pakistan domestic cricket. But you know the point I'm trying to make. Hasaranga has Wanedu Hasaranga has retired from Test cricket at the age of 26. Now, we don't think of him as a Test cricketer. He's only played 4 times, most recently in 2021. But the fact is, he is saying himself that this is due to wanting to be available for more franchise cricket, so not being available for selection to Sri Lanka. And a guy who was, he was the most highly sought after player in the IPL in the last mega auction. He's clearly a player of prodigious talent. You can see a world where he would have been a very significant Test cricketer as well, deciding to pull out at 26, and not talking necessarily about his availability for Sri Lanka, but his availability in franchise cricket. And, we talk about this all the time, but it does strike me as another little tell that we're going to have more and more players who say, you know what, I'm just going to focus on making as much money as I can.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's inevitable. It's the way it's going. I don't know that it helps them very much so. I mean, I've watched a fair bit of Will Smeed this year, who's a very talented striker of a cricket ball. And when he first burst on the scene, thought, oh, this lad's really exciting. Well, if you just play franchise cricket, you don't get an awful lot of opportunity to develop your game. And it's starting to show a little bit, actually. So if you don't play 4-day cricket, and we've seen this with quite a few of those sorts of players, people like Tom Banton, who burst onto the scene, was very exciting, KP-esque. Actually, the ones that tend to thrive, like someone like Harry Brook, who's playing more formats, because it's funny how white ball cricket can be both formulaic but also does require you to have really good cricket smarts, and the more different types of cricket you play, the more you experience different types of bowling, you face different challenges, so you're able to react to those challenges rather than just seeing the ball as something to deposit over the boundary rope by hook or by crook.
And you're often hearing players have this exact conversation. Mike Atherton says it a lot when he's reflecting on the fact that he didn't have a T20 career, but he likes to think that if he did, his Test foundation would have aided him in being more expanded. Now, he's probably a bad example, Mike, but I'm just using him as a guy who knows more about batting than any of us ever will, who thinks that having a correct, technically well-tuned red ball game contributes to being able to be at your best as a white ball player.
Well, you still need balance.
You're denying your chance to do the former by focusing purely on the latter.
Well, absolutely. You still need to have right balance. You need to have your weight going in the right direction when you're hitting a ball, all those kind of things. And you hit an awful lot more balls as well if you play red ball cricket. Yeah. And I mean, one of the great examples for me is Jamie Smith, a guy who hasn't featured in either of these squads, but is playing 100 cricket. We've seen him get a century in 70 balls against Kent. but also capable of 100 and 170 balls. And he has got nuance and complexity to his game, which I think is going to help him in all forms. And it's one of the really pleasing features of somewhere like Surrey, which has got money, so it's a wealthy county, but their youngsters have come through the system, like Gus Atkinson, but with the bat especially, Will Jacks, Jamie Smith, Ollie Pope, have all played a lot of red ball cricket, and they want to play red ball cricket. And in so doing, it's enhancing, I believe, their white ball skills.
Some good news and some bad news on scheduling during the week, Daniel. The good news, Richard Gould, the chief executive of the ECB, said to us on the Final Word a couple of months ago that he wanted to help fix the Zimbabwe-Bangladesh problem in that England never hosts them. Well, England are going to host Zimbabwe in a test match for the first time since 2003. That'll happen in the summer of 2025. We don't know where it'll be, and we don't know anything more beyond the fact that it's a 4-day test match in the May of 2025. But absolutely a step in the right direction. It was inexcusable that England haven't hosted Zimbabwe in that stretch of time as a fellow full member. The same applies to Bangladesh, who they haven't hosted since 2010 in Test cricket. England haven't been pulling their weight, nor have Australia. It's very obvious that both countries have made the decision to play sides that suit them when they suit them at home. Well, much as it was with Ireland getting a chance in 2019, and this year Zimbabwe will get theirs too. I wrote last year for The Guardian about why this is the right time to reopen this conversation, and like I said before, I think Richard Gould deserves some credit for this and being on the front foot, saying that he wants to right this wrong. So that's a big tick. It's not perfect, of course. We'd love to see a series, and we'd love to see them as part of potentially the World Test Championship into the future, but we shouldn't be opposing progress in as an exercise in trying to be perfectionist on this when the schedule's so hectic.
Well, it's a really good sign, isn't it? And Richard Gould, I'm bound to be a bit biased because I know him quite well from Surrey, but I always thought that he was going to be great for the ECB. His instincts are always right in this regard. So we're seeing an example of someone's instincts being put into practice, and that's a good sign. Obviously, it's a long way to go.
The other side of it, though, in the more world is fucked space, is the South Africa story that we were on to a couple of weeks ago. This was all Neil Manthorpe, actually. He broke this on his blog, which is an excellent place to get all your news about South African cricket, Manners on Cricket, where you can subscribe and read everything he has to say. Well, he foreshadowed this, and the chief executive of Cricket South Africa has confirmed overnight that Proteas players will not be available for their tour of New Zealand early next year. Their 2 Test match series World Test Championship points on offer, because it clashes with the SA20. So the report reads that any player who's contracted through the CSA with the SA20, their short form competition, their mini IPL, won't be able to go to New Zealand for Test cricket. What that means exactly, Manners has speculated the kind of players who might get called up for that. It could be Dean Elgar getting a return to captain, having been jettisoned last year. Maybe Hashim Amla comes out of retirement. There'll be other players in the mixer. But, I mean, what more can you say? The fact that South Africa, who have been a Test giant, are not going to send a full-strength Test team or anything like it to New Zealand, who were the World Test champions themselves only 2.5 years ago. It's just disgraceful. I get it. I get the competing interests, but that's almost holding a gun to Cricket New Zealand's head and saying,
exactly.
If you don't change your schedule, we're going to send a B or a C or a D or an E team.
Yeah, and maybe they will change the schedule, or maybe they'll invite a different team. I don't know. I mean, this is a problem with the proliferation of these leagues, and more and more reason why we need to have an international window. I think I can't see any other way of doing it, because at the moment you've got a series of bilateral negotiations taking place between boards while the leagues happen. They just happen. IPL has got a window. There's no other international cricket that's played pretty much while that happens.
Yep.
And we'll need to think about doing exactly that. The ICC will need to think about creating international windows, because this will just destroy bilateral international cricket. The idea of and it would be so sub-strength. I'm trying to think what a South African team, you mentioned some names.
Yeah, they have. Manners has gone through and listed a few players who might be available, but it's like any player in SA20, anyone
Marco
contracted
Janssen,
in it. I know, briefly last year, it was Temba Bavuma, who wasn't contracted initially and got a contract
right.
at the last. He's the Test captain right now. He's a peripheral player in that comp, but he's the main man in a Test team, at least as far as leading it is concerned. And he won't be there. Kiyisa Rabada, who's got one of the best Test records in the world, he won't be there. Marco Jansen won't be there. Lungi Ngidi won't be there. I mean, all these senior players. Well, I know De Kock's not playing it anyway right now, but your point stands. Anyone who's anyone in South African cricket has got a deal in the SA20. So their Test side is going to be ravaged by this. And we heard all the talk from South African administrators when the SA20 was coming in, as this was going to fund all of their cricket and make it viable to have all the formats working in concert with one another. More, this is, case in point, why that's just bullshit.
Yeah, it's absolute bullshit. And I guess they could just rescind invitations to South Africa from now on to play Test cricket. If that's the way they're treating Test cricket, then there's no point in inviting them.
But then you've got the World Test Championships integrity will be, threatened by that too. And I know last week we had
why the ICC needs to come in
and create
so we
had the stoush
windows.
about over-rates last week, and we shouldn't go back over that because Brat and Jeff did a good job with this. But, I mean, that is the over-rate penalties were being used as a stick to whack the World Test Championship with, saying it'll lack in credibility if you start deducting points for overrates and all the rest of it. Well, this is more problematic
way
than
more,
points deductions, having teams not even fielding proper sides. So we'll keep a watching brief on that. Okay, Daniel, one last break on the show. When we return, we've still got quite a bit to get through, including some Australian selections. We've got Big Bash stuff. We've got Pat Cummins talking about climate change once again, and the West Indies beating India in a bilateral series.
Ooh.